Ubisoft, EA, Activision Blizzard. These are the names that usually come to mind when we talk about the most evil game studios in the world. But then I stumbled across Marvel Rivals, a surprisingly fun Overwatch clone packed with loads of gooner bait, which I very much appreciate. Made by a Chinese company I'd barely even heard of, NetEase, and that's when the rabbit hole opened. At first, I just wanted to know who they were, but the deeper I dug, the more shady shit I uncovered. We're talking illegal business deals, censorship scandals, employee abuse, and of course, some of the most manipulative microtransactions in the entire industry. This isn't just another greedy game dev, this might be the most evil game studio of all time. So, let's establish exactly who we're dealing with. NetEase isn't some scrappy startup. If Marvel Rivals was the first time you heard of them, you might be surprised that they're a pretty huge deal in China and some parts of the world. The main company kicked off way back in 1997 as one of China's OG internet companies. They had a lot of success, and in 2001, they made a super smart pivot into making video games. And that move paid off, immediately. They first dropped a couple of massive MMOs based on that classic Chinese story, Journey to the West. The games were Fantasy Westward Journey and the Westward Journey online series. These games were considered top-tier MMOs and pulled in tons of players. And when I say massive, I mean insanely popular. Millions of players. By April 2005, Fantasy Westward Journey already had 25 million registered users. But how did they achieve and sustain this massive scale? Popularity was part of it, sure, but this era cemented NetEase's core monetization philosophy called deeply predatory. We're not just talking about selling cosmetics. This is where they hone the art of psychological manipulation for profit. Gacha mechanics with abysmal drop rates for desirable items, pushing players into endless spending loops chasing that dopamine hit. Just the classic crazy pay-to-win elements, meaning that unless you're dropping hundreds of dollars, you're not getting very far in the game. But NetEase was just getting started, and they had a plan to expand globally. So to start, in 2008, they landed a huge deal with Blizzard Entertainment, becoming the exclusive operator for World of Warcraft and StarCraft 2 in China. But this wasn't just about distribution. It gave them invaluable insight into Western game design and operations, knowledge they would later twist for their own ends. The Blizzard partnership continued to deepen over the years. They launched loads more games in China over the years, like Hearthstone in 2014, Heroes of the Storm in 2015, and the massively popular Overwatch in 2016. They also partnered with Microsoft in 2015 to launch Minecraft in China, too. To the outside world, NetEase looked like a bridge, connecting Western hits with eager Chinese gamers. But behind the scenes, NetEase was carefully studying. And in 2017, they finally decided to make their move. They released both games at the same time and were super similar to each other: Knives Out and Rules of Survival. Now, at first glance, you might notice something about these games. Well, if you haven't figured it out, both of these were blatant copies of PUBG, which was dominating at the time on PC since its release that year. So basically, NetEase had seen this and decided to just clone it into a mobile game. Side note, but I had to wrap my head around this. Both Knives Out and Rules of Survival were super similar to each other. But why? Basically, NetEase decided to release two very similar games at the same time to essentially A/B test small differences between the two. For example, Knives Out had a more grounded and realistic aesthetic, while Rules of Survival was supposed to be like a bigger and more arcadey design, such as having a map with 120 players compared to Knives Out having a 100-player map. Strange strategy, but moving on. What's very important to note is that both NetEase games hit the market a few months before the official PUBG Mobile launched in March 2018. It was a clear ripoff, but was executed in a very cunning way by switching the device type. And this is where the real trouble started brewing. From this point on, NetEase basically became a lawsuit magnet. Unsurprisingly, the creators of PUBG, Krafton, weren't amused by this blatant plagiarism. In April 2018, Krafton hit NetEase with a lawsuit. The charges painted a clear picture: copyright infringement, copying the distinctive look and feel, and fundamentally unfair competition. Krafton's lawyers didn't mince words. They argued NetEase didn't just borrow the Battle Royale concept, they systematically lifted unique, copyrighted elements that made PUBG, PUBG. We're talking the exact 100-player airdrop mechanic, the signature shrinking safe zone forcing confrontations, specific building layouts players recognized, vehicle designs, iconic items like using a frying pan as both weapon and armor, the specific function of energy drinks for boosting, the overall visual aesthetic and user interface design, right down to the iconic victory phrase, "Winner, winner, chicken dinner." Krafton said that this was a deliberate bad faith effort to confuse players and hijack PUBG's momentum before the official mobile game could establish itself. While an initial settlement was reached in 2019, NetEase allegedly failed to uphold its end of the bargain, prolonging the legal battle. Ultimately, Krafton won in late 2023. While the court denied the massive $65 million damage request, NetEase was still found liable and forced to pay an undisclosed sum. They lost. They were caught red-handed. But maybe this was an isolated incident, a single misstep? Far from it. Losing intellectual property lawsuits seems to be part of NetEase's business model. Back in 2014, they had already lost a significant copyright case brought by their rival, Tencent. The court explicitly barred NetEase from using specific copyrighted materials belonging to Tencent, a clear warning they seemingly just ignored. Fast forward to 2017 to 2019, the same thing happened. Tencent sued NetEase again, this time for the unauthorized use of hundreds of popular music tracks in their streaming service. NetEase lost again, paying $120,000 in damages. It demonstrated a pattern. If they want something, whether it's game mechanics or music, they appear willing to take it first and deal with the legal consequences later. But NetEase was just getting started. The lesson NetEase seemed to take wasn't don't steal, but perhaps steal better or just factor lawsuits into the cost of doing business. And that's exactly what they did with their next game. Enter Hyperfront, stealthily released in July 2022. I mean, just look at this shit. For anyone who doesn't know, this is a clear clone of Riot Games' Valorant. NetEase didn't make any attempt to hide it, like they literally just recycled the whole Valorant game and shitted it out again. But of course, Riot Games was not going to let that slide and just a couple months later hit Hyperfront with a lawsuit. Riot pointed out that NetEase seemed to start working on Hyperfront almost immediately after Valorant launched on PC in 2020, and alleged they just copied substantial parts of their game. Riot listed everything: character designs, abilities, map layouts, weapon looks and stats, gun skins, weapon charms, basically the whole package. Riot's lawyer, Dan Nabel, didn't pull any punches. He basically said, "All of our creative choices are mirrored in NetEase's game. We don't think that changing the color of a character's ability or slightly modifying the visual appearance changes the fact that it's copyright infringement. It's like that old saying, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig." Riot admitted NetEase tweaked a few visuals after their initial complaints, but they insisted the core problem remained. NetEase was still fundamentally copying their homework. Riot demanded big bucks and damages and crucially wanted the court to shut Hyperfront down. And the outcome was pretty decisive. In April 2023, less than a year after the game's release, NetEase announced Hyperfront servers were going dark worldwide. Game over. Less than a year from launch to termination. Another high-profile clone, another public humiliation, another demonstration of their apparent disregard for originality and intellectual property rights. This cycle of clone, sue, settle, shut down seemed ingrained in their strategy. But this was the least of their problems because NetEase was having even worse internal problems. And to explain that, we must discuss the notorious 996 work culture. 996 isn't just long hours, it's a specific, grueling schedule. 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. A 72-hour minimum work week, frequently reported to be without legally mandated overtime pay. It's prevalent in China's tech sector, but what company has constantly had loads of reports and employee testimonials over the years of its happening? Of course, it's NetEase. Well, at this point, I'm not surprised stuff like this was going on at NetEase. Fortunately, the Chinese Supreme People's Court finally declared 996 illegal in August 2021. This seemingly helped to crack down on NetEase, forcing their workers to drop crazy hours, but who knows, maybe they just got better at covering it up. But this wasn't the only government intervention needed, because the Chinese government was about to drop a 6-star wanted level on NetEase's head for some even crazier shit. So, in late 2024, a bombshell dropped. High-level NetEase executives were arrested. This wasn't middle management. 9 employees, including senior figures, were detained over allegations of bribery and massive money laundering. The reported sum involved? An almost unbelievable $139 million US. Initial reports connected this alleged activity directly to their esports and marketing divisions, the very parts of the company responsible for building hype and managing their public image. How much of their promotional success was potentially funded by dirty money? They also reportedly blacklisted nearly 30 partner companies implicated in the scheme, suggesting a potentially wide-reaching network of corruption. This whole situation makes you seriously wonder if the entire company is doing things the right way. Was this just a few bad apples doing illegal stuff secretly, or is it a sign of how the whole company works? Like, they think rules are just optional and it's okay to move lots of money around illegally. The investigation is still ongoing, but you can't really make this up. I mean, who knows what they will uncover? Which brings us full circle to Marvel Rivals. The development of Rivals reportedly began during the middle of 2019. Making a Marvel game wasn't new territory at NetEase. They'd already done Marvel Duel and Marvel Super War. At this point, a superhero shooter using Marvel characters felt almost inevitable. But it was a genre they hadn't tackled yet. But development faced issues, mainly COVID disruptions and the shift to Unreal Engine 5. The game cooked in relative secrecy for 4 years, until late 2023 when rumors about the game started appearing. Then, on March 27th, they posted a cryptic tweet, followed by a trailer drop the next day. Marvel Rivals arrived looking like a direct challenger to Overwatch 2, appealing to players frustrated with Blizzard's handling of its own hero shooter. The timing seemed perfect. But NetEase's instincts for control and manipulation surfaced immediately during the closed alpha test in May 2024, where they invited streamers and YouTubers to test the game. The gameplay? Generally well received. The terms for content creators? Literally Nazi Germany. Buried within the contracts, creators had to sign a non-disparagement clause. In plain English, play our game, stream it, make videos, but you are legally prohibited from expressing any negative opinions publicly. No critical reviews, no sarcastic remarks, no comparisons deeming rivals inferior to competitors. It was a gag order. The whole attempt to silence people happened right after NetEase also had their huge breakup with Blizzard. They had been partners for 14 years, but then they couldn't agree on a new deal, so the partnership completely fell apart. As a result, all of Blizzard's super popular games just disappeared for players in China. And how did NetEase act when all this went down? Basically like a little kid having a temper tantrum, really childish and grumpy about it. They live streamed the demolition of a giant orc statue outside their office. I mean, like, what kind of company does that? They even served beverages named Blizzard Green Tea, a common insult in Chinese slang, implying they're untrustworthy. Their actions screamed bitterness and unprofessionalism. So, considering everything that had already happened, trying to use contracts to silence game creators and stop them from comparing the new game to others, like Overwatch, wasn't just bold, it was a really dumb move. Quickly, famous streamers like Seagull spoke out about it. People freaked out immediately, and they were furious. It got so bad that some creators reportedly got kicked out of the early game testing just for being connected to others who spoke out against the rule. Of course, this was another huge PR disaster, and NetEase tried to fix things by saying the classic meaningless phrases. They started apologizing publicly, admitting the rule was way too strict, excessively restrictive, and shouldn't have been there. They said they really wanted to hear everyone's opinions, but of course, this was all horseshit. However, despite this initial stumble, Marvel Rivals launched on December 6, 2024 to crazy success. 10 million players in the first 72 hours, over 40 million by February 2025. By all metrics, a certified blockbuster hit. Yet the success meant more people began to realize how evil this company was. To start, as a major Chinese corporation, NetEase must comply with the Chinese Communist Party. Post-launch, players quickly found this out. Mention politically sensitive topics in game chat, Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong independence, the Tiananmen Square massacre, or even the year 1989, yeah, your message gets blocked. Even the harmless Winnie the Pooh, used online as a meme to mock leader Xi Jinping, is on the blacklist. Free speech simply doesn't exist in NetEase's virtual worlds if it conflicts with Beijing's agenda. Then, of course, is the Overwatch clone debate. I'll be honest, when I first played Marvel Rivals, I questioned how legal it was when I compared it to Overwatch. The situation wasn't helped when former Blizzard president Mike Ybarra publicly labeled Rivals an Overwatch clone on Twitter, attempting a comparison between Marvel's Black Widow, created in the 1960s, and Overwatch's Widowmaker, created in the 2010s. Now, he got cooked for this, but other examples of how similar the games are valid, especially when you consider NetEase's history of doing this shit. Blizzard hasn't sued NetEase over the game Rivals, at least not yet. Rivals does have some unique things going for it, to be fair. You play in third-person view, you can destroy parts of the game world, and there's more close-up fighting, but I don't know, let's see how it plays out. But maybe the most chilling, almost evil move came after that. NetEase is enjoying the huge success of Marvel Rivals, but they recently made a decision that has shocked the game industry and really showed the ruthless side that people talked about. In early 2025, they fired the entire American design team in Seattle. These were the developers who played a big part in making Marvel Rivals a hit game. Just like that, fired. This included important people like the US game director Thaddeus Sasser. Sasser himself publicly pointed out how messed up it was. You work hard to help make a game a giant success and then you get fired as a reward. This whole situation sent a clear message. NetEase sees employees, even successful ones, as disposable things they can just get rid of. It seemed like once the difficult job of launching the game was done, NetEase decided to cut costs, keep all the control with the main director back in China, and throw away the American talent. This action made earlier rumors seem much more believable. These rumors were that sources inside NetEase said executives secretly made fun of Western developers from places like the US or Europe, using insults like calling them lazy, entitled, slow, and woke. Whether those exact words were actually used or not, the act of firing the successful Seattle team said a lot. It made NetEase look like a cold, calculating company, maybe even one that's prejudiced against workers from other countries. It's pretty clear that they care more about saving money and keeping control than about loyalty, respect, or the very talented people who helped them succeed. It felt like something a villain in a story would do, but to be honest with you, after looking at the company's complete dark story, I'm not really surprised. Another company, which is even bigger than NetEase but run completely differently, is Epic Games. If you want to find out more about them and how they happened to make Fortnite by accident, then click here to watch. Thanks.